How have computer products reshaped our thinking?
I suppose I can answer that in two parts. One, personally, for me, I find in my research and so on, I do a lot more of it now on the internet. And I do find, on the one hand, it's very helpful, it's very rich, you can find almost anything you want. But the downside of that is I find I get a bit scattered. And that's unusual for me because normally I have fairly good powers of concentration, years of Zazen practice, but even that has not, doesn't protect me from definitely a feeling of being scattered and distracted more than I used to. The other thing is that I've been doing a lot of reading about the effects of large amounts of time being interconnected and being networked and so on. And while people say often, of course, there are many benefits and people talk about the benefits a lot, but they also talk a lot about the downside, the depression, distraction, lack of ability to concentrate and focus. And the more I looked into this, the more I realized, reading about neuroplasticity and so on, I mean, that this apparently is actually doing something to the wiring in our brains. So these symptoms are not just imaginary, but there are neurophysiological causes for them. And I mean, one of the things that they talk about is the reading brain not being stimulated as much as it was, and therefore it's becoming gradually inactive, and instead a skim reading brain, or it's still reading, but the kind of reading you do on the internet or on a phone. I should say, for reasons of disclosure, I don't have a smartphone. And people say, well, in that case, you shouldn't be talking about it. But I do have a computer, and I have a daughter who spends a lot of time on her smartphone. So I think I do know something about it. And so I find that, okay, on the one hand, years ago, I thought, okay, if people are going to read less, well, that's okay, that's the way it's heading. People thought the book was really on the way out because of digital media. I now find people saying, oh no, the book is coming back, so that kind of reading hasn't died yet. But the disturbing thing is that the kind of thinking that you apparently get when you skim read rather than reading a book over a longer period of time tends to be superficial, tends to move you to extremes that you think in terms not of a continuum of grays, dark to light, but in black and white terms. And this, I think, is leading to a lot of the polarization of especially political life in not just in the US, but in the UK and in many countries. And the tendency to conform, that you don't, in reading a book, you can put it down, you can look out of the window, you can think about what you've been reading, but apparently the kind of reading we do on phones and computer screens, they say, leads to a sort of conformism, which then would explain the unfortunate success of the populists and the demagogues these days. So while granting the advantages, it seems to me that we've got a lot of disadvantages, one of which I didn't mention, which was, if our communication isn't like it is right now, face-to-face, bodies in the same room, but is through texting, an abstract medium, representations, text, something very abstract. And I gather that young people often sit in the same room but text each other. And when asked about this, they say, yes, it's weird, but it's just what we do. That this apparently leads to a lack of empathy. And that seems a serious thing, because empathy seems to me to be a very good thing to have and to have more of. But the degrading or downgrading of our communication to representations, images, and texts seems to be leading to this, and I would want to resist that and say, actually, if we could spend a bit more time together in the same room talking, where you can learn so much more, because you hear the tone of voice, you read the body language, you can figure out much more easily what is not being said. I think there's many fewer miscommunications under those conditions than if it's all text-driven. So, yes, I think it's having quite an effect on the way we think. You know, a lot of people experience the symptoms of addiction, that they hear the phone ringing when it hasn't. They hallucinate vibrations in it that haven't taken place. The studies that say in the UK how many times per day people check their phones, the number seems to go up every year, every study they do. So I think definitely people are becoming addicted. And so I think we need to study the psychology of addiction. You know, the people that make the apps, I've read a great deal about this, and they're designed to be addictive. And there's the Stanford Capitology Laboratory, or something like that, the Stanford Laboratory for, what is it called? They're teaching people how to capture people's attention and keep it. I think it was in the late 80s that it was founded, and that's what they train people to do. And it took them a long time to realize there was something problematic about this, because they say very proudly on their website, we train people to think differently, to change their thinking and their behavior. And I'm thinking, oh, I wouldn't take that very likely, and in fact it's downright scary to me. And then they realized there was a problem, so they started saying, oh, but there's an ethics to it, and of course we want these techniques to capture people's attention and addict them to our apps. We want them to be used, of course, we expect them to be used for the good, but they also occasionally let slip that, well, if they're not being, then okay, we have to let people know that this isn't good. But of course, they know that they're being used not always for the good, but to sell people stuff, usually stuff that they don't need. So the argument that they often give when people say, well, this is really disturbing, they say, oh, but people don't have to buy these apps. Or if they download them, they don't have to use them, or they can use them in moderation, which is totally disingenuous, because, I mean, if I'm finding difficulty sometimes concentrating, or I get distracted, then think of a 16-year-old young person, a young man or young woman, on the one hand being told to exercise self-control, which is not the strongest suit of people at that age, and on the other hand you have all these PhDs from this Stanford lab, super bright people who have designed these apps precisely to hook people. So I think, I mean, I see it much more now. I've been working on this for years, but finally people are saying, oh, we're going to have to regulate this somehow. And I think that will have to happen. I mean, one thing is, yes, I think we need to study the psychology of addiction and get therapy. I mean, this is the theme of our conference here. Develop therapies for these people. Some ex-employees of Google and Facebook and so on are actually doing this. They left the company because they thought, we don't want to be involved with this. And so there are now some websites that they founded, because they know how it works, that help people get away from it. The other thing, I'll be suggesting this tomorrow when I talk, is the irony of how these companies operate is that many of them now have mindfulness training free for employees. Now, that's like you're an OxyContin lab and you say to your workers, well, help yourself to the products, guys, and then you offer them free Naxalone. And people were talking about Mac mindfulness earlier today. I'm not sure that helps. But if people could realize that just sitting, having quiet time, turning the damn phone off or getting rid of it, is something human beings have been doing for I'd say hundreds of thousands of years. It's not deviant behavior, although it looks it to many young people these days. But just to sit with one's thoughts and chill, cool out, just have some downtime, seems to me is another way of proceeding. I mean, people say, why do you bother about this? This thing is happening anyway. Well, we needn't be that fatalistic. It's happening because it's being driven by capitalism. It's been driven by Facebook. It's been driven by these tech titans because it's the best business model they've ever seen. Addict people to your product and keep them hooked on it. And so I think we also could use some government regulation. If they're going to regulate heroin, then why not regulate Facebook or Google or YouTube, for that matter? Of course, then you get into freedom of speech problems and so on. But these are private companies. They can show the content they want if they were being responsible, and they can say, oh, we don't want to show this content. This is beginning to happen, fortunately, but for a long time they said, we're just platforms, we have no responsibility.